The Rams offense exceeded expectations in 2023, but could they have an even higher ceiling this season? We discuss the Rams 2024 fantasy outlook on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm writing about NFL, fantasy betting, you name it, at sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on to get started. We are going to start our team series. So each day we are going to go through one team and just dig into all of their players and their fantasy outlook for this upcoming season. We decided to start with the Los Angeles Rams because why not? They have a lot of exciting pieces here. Last year, the Rams exceeded expectations, right? Just not even in fantasy, but with a 10-7 record, they made the playoffs. We were all shocked. They averaged the 8th most points per game in the NFL and then the 7th most fantasy points per game in the NFL last year, while they had the league leader in rushing yards per game in Kyren Williams, and then a top 5 player in receiving yards in Puka Nacua, both 5th-round picks over the last 2 years. So players that you were not expecting, right? But let's start with those star players in Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua. So with Kyren Williams here, is he worth a first-round pick next year's draft? He was the RB2 in fantasy points per game last year. What do you expect out of him this season?
Yeah, I think the only question you have about Kyren Williams is durability. He's a smaller back. He's had some injury issues in the past, and the Rams tend to be fickle. If a guy gets hurt, they just seem to move on pretty quickly. They've done that with Cam Akers. They've done that going back even with Todd Gurley when he was at a high rate of productivity. When he had the knee issues, that was it. They were done with him. They got everything they could out of him, and he was gone, and they replaced him with the next guy. The one good thing about the Rams is Sean McVay tends to load up one back. I mean, you'll see flashes of other guys touch the ball, but they're typically a one-back team. And the other thing that you add is they're a one-back, mostly rushing team. I think Kyren Williams has some upside as a receiver if they want to use him that way, but that's where you have a little bit of old school feelings from Sean McVay. I mean, he's older school than we think. I know he's got the schemes and everything he does, but he's a rather conservative coach when it comes to his personnel, and that's good for fantasy because he's not going to just involve random guys. You pretty much know where you stand with him, who he's going to go with. Okay, so we look at Kyren Williams in that sense. He was very good. Right now, he is RB7 on the board, 16th overall, so I think that's right there. I don't think I would invest a first-round pick on him. There's just too much at wide receiver available, including Puka Nacua. Again, really, it's the only question. I just don't trust it totally. Like, if I am in half or full point PPR, I think I can downgrade him a little bit because I'm not sure what his role is going to be in the passing game. And you have the durability factor. But I still think based on volume, he has to be a top 10 running back, and that's where he's right now, RB7. I don't know if, again, I'm going to go take him too early. There's just too many better values, especially if I'm getting rewarded for pass catching here. We do have some upside guys, Bijan Robinson, Breece Hall, that I would take ahead of him, and some other situations where it'll factor in a workhorse. But I look at it, that's my only concern here. But to kind of hedge that bet, I'm going to look later and get Blake Corum and take this kid probably around where he's right now ranked overall, probably well into the second round once I get an elite wide receiver or another running back.
I'll say I think Kyren Williams might be the most underrated player in this draft. He's going in the second round. Like to do what he did last year and to be a young running back, he should be so highly valued. He's going, like you mentioned, RB7, second round pick. Like there's a very strong case for him to be the second running back off the board behind Christian McCaffrey. Like Kyren Williams was one of two guys last year that was consistent. Like every week you put him into your lineup that he was healthy. he scored points. It wasn't even close between the RB2 and the RB3, right? Like Christian McCaffrey, clear RB1 at 22 fantasy points per game and half PPR. Then it was Kyren Williams at 20 points per game. Next closest was Raheem Mostert at 17. He scored 3 more points per game and half PPR than any other running back besides Christian McCaffrey. And when you go down this list of Mostert, Achane at RB4, Kamara RB5, Travis Etienne at 6, Breece Hall at 7, those guys were all so highly inconsistent. They had big games, but highly inconsistent. You couldn't count on them. I mean, Kyren Williams, I think we are overlooking him this year, and maybe we're worried about Blake Corum. But like you mentioned, Sean McVay just typically uses one running back.
Yeah, just be careful here because these later round backs, we've seen it before to the level of undrafted, even with James Robinson. We saw it a little bit with Dameon Pierce. These undrafted backs seem to have or these late round backs or undrafted seem to have just a short shelf life, and they're not always going to repeat what they do. We saw it again. If I want to go back to another name, Philip Lindsay, he did hold up and gave you a good few fantasy seasons, but then it ended here. So we're going to probably try to extract a little bit more out of Kyren Williams. But that said, just be careful. The reason like Jonathan Taylor and Bijan and Breece Hall, these are a little bit guys with higher pedigree that we know are not going to go away. And Corum is going to be a factor if Williams has more durability issues. So I think I would take that group, but maybe not that many other guys ahead of Kyren Williams right now. Running back, I think it's going to come down to Kyren Williams or a wide receiver, right? If it comes down to him, or a wide receiver like a Marvin Harrison Jr., that would be a tough choice for me, right? But I think in the running backs, I think he's just about right in the kind of the middle of the RB1s in the top 12.
And then moving on to Puka Nacua. So his rookie year was stupid good, right? Broke the rookie record in receptions and receiving yards, put up 1,486 receiving yards last year. That was fourth most in the NFL, behind only Tyreek Hill, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown. Had 5 games with over 150 scrimmage yards, including the playoffs, the most by a rookie in the Super Bowl era by 2 games. And then because like even we see how good his regular season is, and then we see him in the playoffs put up 181 receiving yards. Like he was such a big part of this offense. Now Cooper Kupp was banged up a lot, and we'll get into Cooper Kupp's value in the next segment. But do you think Cooper Kupp, if he makes it the full year, he's healthy, does that bring down Puka at all? Are you still happy? Like, do you think Puka Nacua should be a top 5 drafted wide receiver this year?
I mean, the talent is there. I mean, you saw it last year. He was taking over some games. He's a hard guy to cover. And we were worried, okay, Cooper Kupp comes back. He's not going to have the value. He's running the same routes as Cooper Kupp or whatever. But then Sean McVay, again, another sign of his super intelligence here. Oh, Puka Nacua is dominating all over the field, running routes everywhere and making big plays. Why would I take this guy off the field? Like, he's not that type of coach. He's going to say, I want to get this guy the ball as much as possible. And I think that trajectory started kind of in training camp when they realized he was healthy. And this is why he dropped a little bit out of BYU in the draft, where people were concerned about him being able to stay on the field. And he's just kind of become a mini celebrity. He's like one of the most popular Rams all of a sudden after the big breakout year. I mean, he's got everything you would ask for: ideal size, speed, strength. I mean, this guy's going to be around in fantasy for a long time. So I wouldn't worry too much about Cooper Kupp. Now, it's just hard for anybody to duplicate his numbers from last year, right? I mean, just keep that in mind. He's wide receiver 8 on the board. That's solid for him. I mean, keep in mind, we're looking at maybe guys like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase and these handful of elite guys, CeeDee Lamb, Amon-Ra St. Brown. But after that, the conversation goes to Puka Nacua. I mean, he was fantastic. He's in a great offense. He's in a quarterback that likes him. So don't overthink it. This guy, I think less concerns about him than Kyren Williams in relation to his draft value being close to his production from last year.
Yeah, I think it's hard to get him with Puka Nacua into the top 5 with the guys you mentioned, and Lamb and Hill and Chase and Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown. But I do think he's in that tier with AJ Brown. I think Marvin Harrison versus Puka Nacua gets hard question. Maybe Garrett Wilson, but I do think Puka Nacua's current ADP right now, it's anywhere from 6 to 8, depending on which site you're looking at. Like, I think that's a very, very fair price, and I think he deserves it. Is it riskier than, if you get a guy like Amon-Ra St. Brown or Chase or Lamb? Like, yeah, but I do think that price is worth it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all in Puka. I mean, I can't say enough about him. I mean, I got him really late in my draft, and he helped me win a championship. So that helps as well. Like, I think he was probably on a lot of championship rosters last year, either picked up after week one or drafted. So again, there's no fluke there with Puka Nacua. I think what you see is what you get, and you're going to get a lot of great fantasy value going forward. Now we'll examine the values of Matthew Stafford and Cooper Kupp more in short term in our next segment here on the show. Whew, I'm recovering for those NBA playoff games, Michelle. What action in game 7. We kind of were thrown off guard a little bit, but you have to be happy if you went with the underdog Pacers on the road against the Knicks, and you took the Timberwolves to take care of business after blowing that 2-0 lead. They came back and took out the defending champion Denver Nuggets. So it is getting closer. We're in the conference finals, so it resets. Here again, you'll get the Pacers and the Celtics. You get the Timberwolves and the Mavericks. It's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. Dallas Stars still alive as well. So Dallas looking good in these playoffs so far. FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. There's going to be a lot of good ones with Luka Doncic and Anthony Edwards and Jason Tatum. A lot of good player props that you can look at here in this round. Visit FanDuel.com/locked-on and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com and check it out, and make sure you get the best odds out there for these games. Should be an exciting conference final round in the NBA. All right, Michelle, it is time to continue the show. And we know Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua, their arrows up, are young stars on the rise. But don't forget about those guys that used to do it, that connected for the Super Bowl: Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford. Let's start with Kupp, Michelle. Let's first start with his ranking and see what you feel like with that now. Wide receiver 23 in redraft leagues and half-point PPR, 42nd on the board overall. First question, can he bounce back after that latest injury-riddled season and live up to that?
Yeah, what's interesting about his price, it's really hasn't been hindered too much by last year, right? He finished as a wide receiver 24 in points per game last season, but that's pretty much exactly where people have him next year. So it's not like you're getting him at a super heavy discount. He's turning 31 years old in June. I will say he really only played 3 healthy games with Matthew Stafford last year because he missed the first 4 weeks with the hamstring injury. He came back, but then Stafford was hurt in week 8, missed week 9. There was a week 10 bye, and then Kupp sprained his ankle in week 11 and kind of played throughout that the rest of the year. But only those 3 healthy games with Kupp, and 2 of those games he had over 20 fantasy points in those games with 118 yards in one and 148 yards in the other. I will say from weeks 5 through 17, the targets were very, very close between Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. And again, Kupp didn't play till week 5. So, and then Kupp didn't play in week 18, I believe, with the playoff rest. So the targets were 95 for Cooper Kupp to Puka Nacua at 102. Now, Nacua was a lot more efficient in his yards per reception. Kupp did have one more receiving touchdown than Nacua during that span, 5-4. So that's why I'm a little nervous about Nacua if Kupp comes back and is fully healthy. But I still think Kupp's range right now, it's fair. Like I don't think he has another top 12 fantasy season left in him. Do you?
No, and that's where the ranking says. And even if he gets in the top 15 or in that situation, you're still getting a pretty good value at wide receiver 23. But yeah, I mean, those names that we mentioned, I mean, it's already hard for Nacua to crash that party. And you got a few more names you think about when you have the Marvin Harrison Jr. presence there. And you're talking about A.J. Brown and what he can do. So it really is a tough not to crack here, and that we didn't even get to like the Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave tier, and potentially Drake London on the uptick here. So there are a lot of receivers that are going to stack up here, younger receivers. Cooper Kupp is on the older side. This could be it for him if he doesn't show much here and shows that sign of age and the production kind of wanes. And I think you can definitely see Cooper Kupp kind of fading a little bit as a fantasy asset. So we'll see. But I think it's going to be a tough decision when you're on the clock here looking at him as a wide receiver 2 versus other guys that are in the borderline between 2 and 3.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy. All these really talented young wide receivers going around the range of Cooper Kupp, the old man, right? But like going back to back to back is basically Cooper Kupp, DK Metcalf, and Devonta Smith. Would you rather DK Metcalf or Kupp for next season in fantasy?
Yeah, it's a tough question because the Seahawks are changing their offense, but I still think DK is the one there. I think you look at what they did with their receivers in Washington, that offense, they're transitioning to Seattle. I think Metcalf will be used a lot better, especially with Tyler Lockett on the fade.
Yeah, I lean Metcalf as well. What about Devonta Smith or Cooper Kupp? So right now we would expect both of them to be the wide receiver twos on their team next year. Which one would you rather roster?
I'm going with Devonta Smith. I think you look at the contract and the way they're going with him, they don't really have a lot of options still. I'm really surprised they didn't really try to upgrade too much. They have a few more bodies, but Dallas Goddard's fading. So I think Devonta Smith is going to have a bigger. And keep in mind, they're both similar, right? They're number one or number two whatever on their team, right? So they're both going to see a lot of targets. I just like Devonta being the younger player with some upside here.
Yeah, and then one more, Malik Neighbors, rookie for the
Oh
Giants,
boy.
or Cooper Kupp.
This is really tough because I don't know if I trust the Giants offense. I think I have to go Cooper Kupp. If I'm looking for immediate returns, I go Cooper Kupp. I just don't know what you're going to get from Malik Neighbors. It's already a bad vibe there with Daniel Jones.
I think I might go for the new shiny trophy
Okay.
here with Malik
If he was
Neighbors.
in any other situation, I might say Neighbors, but there's something I don't like about this Daniel Jones development. I feel like we could be seeing Drew Lock. So I don't. But I'd take Stafford with Kupp and Nacua easily in that
Yeah.
situation.
So let's get into Matthew Stafford then, because he finishes as the quarterback 18 in points per game last year, basically the same amount of points per game as Baker Mayfield. But the later half of the season, that's when he really started to like shine in fantasy. And it wasn't even the first half of the season. It wasn't like Matthew Stafford was bad for the NFL. He was putting up a lot of yards. Remember, he was putting up like 300 yards a ton of times, but he wasn't throwing any touchdowns whatsoever. So from weeks 1 through 11, the first 9 games of the season that he played, he had 9 passing touchdowns to 8 interceptions, averaged 250 passing yards per game, only 13 and a half fantasy points per game. That's atrocious for a quarterback, right? But over his last 6 games played, he was quarterback 5 during that span from weeks 12 through 18. He was averaging 20 fantasy points per game, 20.3 actually to be exact, 284 passing yards per game. He had 15 touchdowns to 3 interceptions over those last 6 games. And like, do we think he can build off the end of that year? What do we think his ceiling is? Do we think he's going too late in drafts? Because I was interested to see what he did in 2021 for fantasy, like where he finished, because that was a huge year for him, right? 41 passing touchdowns, nearly 290 passing yards per game. He still only finished as a quarterback 11 in points per game in 2021. So like, really, is there a ceiling for Matthew Stafford?
Yeah, it's hard to know what you're going to get. I mean, he actually showed us something that he could rebound well from the injuries he's had. He could be nearing the end here as well. But again, the Rams don't really show too much of an indication. I think they do want to turn the page at some point, but they're rumored to go after some bigger quarterback names, such as Michael Penix Jr. That did not materialize in the draft. So I still think they believe in Stafford. And again, I think Stafford is in that territory with all those other big armed kind of veteran just quarterbacks that are not really going to give you much running. So that goes with Kirk Cousins, it goes with Aaron Rodgers. That's where you have to decide here with those tiers. And I think Stafford has a little bit better proven track record. What I would do is get a Stafford or a Rodgers and kind of play the matchups a little bit with their passing games, because there's going to be some games where I think the Rams and Jets are pretty good defensively now. So there'll be some games where these guys are not thrown a lot or the touchdowns get pilfered. So that's kind of happened to Stafford last year as well. So I wouldn't want him as a standalone, but in a 2 QB league, in a situation where I'm platooning or streaming, I would love to have Matthew Stafford as part of the mix.
So let me ask you, let's say you're waiting on a quarterback in a 1 quarterback league, and your options are to take either Tua Tagovailoa at the 94th overall, quarterback 14 off the board, or wait and take Stafford a good 30 picks later, and go with Matthew Stafford later on in the draft.
Yeah, I can't really go with Tua at the situation. I mean, if you weigh the situations, they're similar with the receiving cores. They just have 2 guys, and Really, I hate to say this, but I trust Stafford right now at his age to stay healthier than Tua.
And if you had to choose one between Stafford or Rodgers, two old men, who are you going with?
I think Stafford's in a better situation. I think what tie breaks this is the Jets defense. They're going to win a lot of games like that with their defense. It's probably the best in the NFL. So it's probably not going to lead to a lot of high scoring games. Right? When they play the Patriots, the Jets are not going to be putting up big points.
Yeah, I agree. I think I'd rather go Stafford there than Rodgers. And one more question: Deshaun Watson or Matthew Stafford for 2024?
Oh man, you had to throw this one in the end, didn't you? I don't believe a lot in Watson right now. I think short term, I like Stafford still. I just trust him a little bit more. I know him with Sean McVay. I don't know what I'm going to get with Watson and Ken Dorsey.
I will say I'd rather Jaden Daniels than all of these guys. Right now,
Yeah,
Jaden Daniels' ADP
easily.
is still super low. Probably will increase as we get closer to the season, but just more upside with his rushing ability.
Oh
When
yeah.
then that span I told you about where he was killing it, -4 rushing yards for Matthew Stafford. So even more impressive, he was quarterback 5 during that span. But I mean, Stafford just gets no rushing yards at all to give you that kind of like floor and ceiling. We're gonna get into some their off-season additions, which is really just one guy and a sleeper that we might be interested in drafting late that kind of broke out for the Rams late last year. We'll get into that right after we hear from one of our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Game Time app. Buying tickets to your favorite event shouldn't be stressful. Game Time is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and a best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun that you'll have. I personally use this app so many times, especially when I lived in Pittsburgh, lived right down the street from Heinz Field, would jump on the app Sunday morning because I was starting to have FOMO, right? Like I needed to go to the game. So I jump on and I knew they always had my back. It's the fastest growing ticketing app in the country for a reason. Get images of your seat before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. Buy tickets in a matter of seconds, 2 taps and you're set. And tickets are sent directly to your phone so you never have to dig through your email. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. All you have to do is download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, that's code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Terms do apply. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We mentioned in the first segment that maybe Kyren Williams' price is going down a little bit because people are worried about Blake Corum entering this backfield. The Rams take Corum with a third round pick this year. I mean, Corum was highly productive at Michigan, right? Like he was that Michigan offense. They ran the ball so much and depended on their defense. He's 5'8", 213 pounds, so on the shorter side, but fine weight, height, balance there. What do you think Corum's role is here? Do you think this was a good or bad landing spot for him in terms of like his fantasy outlook to begin his career?
Yeah, everyone thought he was going to land in Los Angeles just on the Chargers and reunite with Jim Harbaugh and kind of be that little combination inside power back, a little bit of receiving back, and maybe slight change of pace here to what they had. But instead, he lands with this situation. And again, Sean McVay back, we're going to pay attention because you're going to look at him. And Corum, he compares favorably to Kyren Williams. So this is also interesting. So he doesn't necessarily give you a compliment. He gives you more of a supplement in the fact that he's a guy that could just take over the carries. So Kyren Williams need a breather. They put Blake Corum out there to just fill in his role. So that actually I think is a good sign for Kyren Williams. It's not like Corum was this accomplished pass catcher in Michigan. They had to kind of showcase that a little bit in the combine with the drills to say, hey, he can catch passes if you need it, but that's really not his game. So I think right now he's a really high-end handcuff because Corum gets on the field in this situation with the blocking and this type of offense opening things up the way they did it in Michigan. I think he's going to be fine, and I think you have to do that. Everything tells us with Sean McVay, they don't split the backfield. They're not going to force like 15 touches each or 12 touches. They don't do a quota like that. Kyren Williams right now is the guy, but again, Kyren did miss games last year. Blake Corum having him there. So yeah, I look at him as a handcuff, but I think a must-have high-end handcuff.
Yeah, he definitely like that's how I see him as well. Like I don't think this is going to be close to like a 50-50 split or all, but he is going late enough in drafts where you are completely fine if you're taking Kyren Williams in the early second round, you don't
Right.
have to go get Corum until very late in your drafts. He's going 126 overall right now, 39th running back off the board. So just get both because we mentioned that Kyren Williams is smaller. Maybe you're worried about injuries, but I do think if Blake Corum gets a chance to come in, like he'll get all the touches if Kyren Williams is hurt because that's what happens. And he should be pretty good because he was a really good running back with Michigan. So, really, probably one of the best handcuffs that you can roster in your league this year. Now, let's say you don't have Kyren Williams, right? And you're just trying to take guys with a shot that has any shot at scoring some decent fantasy points this year later in your draft. Would you rather Corum or Ezekiel Elliott?
Well, I know Ezekiel Elliott will be on the field, so it's really hard to go with Corum there. And again, they don't have much else. Tarico Dowdle committee and all that. So I think at least I trust Elliott to get the touches. So I'm going Elliott.
Corum or Tajay Spears?
Oh, this one's a little bit tougher. I think overall, someone could hit a home run. It's Corum. I think it's pretty close, but I go with Spears because I think he has a bit of standalone value.
I think I might go with Corum there
It's
because
tough. Yeah.
yeah, it is tough. And then one more, Corum or Zach Charbonnet with the Seahawks?
I think I'm going Corum. I don't really see much of Charbonnet that I really like, and we'll see. The offense is changing there. They might give Kenneth Walker a few more opportunities there with that offense. So, yeah, I just like Corum again. The Rams running game. We know the guy that gets the ball is going to be productive and give us good fantasy numbers.
And I'll say for the guy that's a sleeper on this offense, right? Demarcus Robinson, who they brought back this year, they re-signed him. I think he could be a really sneaky, great target late in drafts. I mean, he didn't really get to play at all until week 12. He didn't play, and then he really started to play a ton from weeks 14 on. But even like weeks 13 through 17 in a 5-game stretch when he finally started to play, like he was right there with the rest of the guys in receptions and targets. It was Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Demarcus Robinson. Those were the only guys that did anything during that span. The next closest wide receiver in receiving yards was 12. So it went 521 Nacua, Cooper Kupp 344, Demarcus Robinson 319, and then Ben Skoranek at 12 receiving yards. So it was these three completely involved and nobody else. Demarcus Robinson was the wide receiver 21 in points per game during that span, averaging 15 and a half points per game in full PPR. Like he definitely is much more interesting in PPR leagues than he would be anything else. But Tyler Higbee now also might not play this entire year with the knee injury that he suffered in the playoff game. So even more targets to go around. Like I could see this just being a 3-man offense, and Robinson could be very, very sneaky in PPR leagues.
Yeah, he's just buried in the rankings. It's just like no one wants to touch him. If you look at him right now, wide receiver 83. So he's way down there. So you can get him for nothing at the end of your draft. Talk about guys to add at the end of your draft. 228 overall. So not even in 12-team leagues that you're seeing him that have 17 rounds. So, look, I want to believe more in Demarcus Robinson, but he's just been a role player all the way. But at that value, we're going to go with it. And this is really more of an 11 personnel team anyway. And Higbee, we'll see how that plays out. They do have some other tight ends, but I can't see it diversifying too much in this passing game. So, again, Demarcus Robinson, maybe the attention will be on Nacua and Kupp, and maybe he'll get a few looks here. I think he's going to have a little bit more value than wide receiver 83. He's probably a wide receiver 4 or 5, depending on the matchup, but I lean towards wide receiver 5 more so with him, and I think he could be drafted a little earlier than that, and then the last pick.
Yeah, there's a lot of guys going before him because you brought up like he's going so late. There's a lot of guys going before him. What other like they're later drafted guys this year that we haven't seen anything.
Not exciting.
Just hoping. Yeah. Or they're guys that you already know stink, right? That haven't done anything in the NFL. And like Demarcus Robinson did it last year in this offense once he got to play. And they clearly re-signed him. He's projected to be a starter. I think he plays a lot. I think he built that connection with Stafford. So it's not a high ceiling pick, but I think it's one of those guys that you could be throwing into your flex when, during bye weeks or if there's injuries. And he put together a 5-game stretch of really nice fantasy points, like very consistent. So just a guy to keep your eye on and consider taking late in your drafts.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody else we'd look on the radar. I think the defense is unit that we'll look at here as well, because again, they don't have Aaron Donald, but they have a lot of young playmakers, different scheme here. So I think they'll have some appeal for sure in fantasy. But yeah, that's about it here for the Rams. So pretty easy breakdown of this first team. We'll have 31 more coming at you before it's all said and done before training camp.
Yep, that's it for today's show. Thank you to you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. Every dayers, Vinnie and I will be back to discuss the Seattle Seahawks. We're going to go through the NFC West this week. So we're going to get to the Seahawks tomorrow, the 49ers on Wednesday, and the Cardinals on Thursday. Don't miss it. Bye, y'all.